Now, we have two key objectives. One is to provide updates on the recent amendment that ICH had on good clinical practices, practice guidelines, uh, and the new guidelines for Division 5. ICH, as Lauren introduced, it's an international conglomeration of few countries. If we get into the history of clinical trials, we had a lot of uh, malpractices, and then research evolved. There were numerous guidelines and codes that were introduced. Eventually, in 1996, ICH was formed with an intent to harmonize the global guidelines for conducting clinical trials. So there were three key founding members: US, Europe, and Japan. They they were the leaders in this, and they started off with ICH guidelines. They developed it in 1996, and then other countries chose either to base their own respective guidelines upon this, or some countries like Canada chose to implement it from 1997. So this is the current formation of ICH group. We have Canada and Switzerland joining in 2014. We have 4 other observers like Brazil and a few more observers. Why do we need this addendum? Uh, since 1996, it has been over 20 years. When these guidelines were written then, the research environment was quite simple. The trial methodology were simple. People used paper CRFs. Uh, there was only trials within the country, or maybe 2-3 countries. But now if you see, the scenario has completely changed. Everything has gone electronic. We have globalized clinical trials. There's a lot of money being pumped into clinical research by the pharmaceutical companies. So there are costs, technological capabilities, everything has increased. Studies have become more complex. Uh, so that was one important factor that contributed to this addendum. The third reason was the various inspection findings. Now, I know you cannot read the fine print, but it says in 2014, the European Medicines Agency submitted a report summary with findings of 398 GCP inspections they conducted in Europe between 2000 and 2012. So Europe used to conduct about 30 inspections per year. They summarized all the findings into this and submitted it to the ICH committee. They realized that despite these guidelines, they still had so many observations, with the yellow part showing the major findings. This is the critical observations and the minor ones. So there wasn't any improvement seen over the years. That was again one reason contributing to this amendment. This represents the latest US FDA statistics on how many number of clinical trials are being conducted throughout the world. In the 1990s, we had research conducted only in the North America, Europe, and barely in Australia. Now you see almost every country is involved. Even the growth of clinical trials, the number of trials registered on US FDA's website, the guidelines were before this. And then we have so many different studies now. It has gone beyond 200,000 different registered trials globally. So the addendum was adopted by ICH in November 2016 after a lot of discussions and numerous meetings between the stakeholders, especially the founding members. And it's called as E6R2. E6 stands for the GCP. So these two are interchangeable, and R2 is revision 2. Basically, it quotes that this guidance is to encourage implementation of improved and more efficient approaches to clinical trial design, conduct, oversight, recording, and reporting while continuing to ensure human subject protection and data integrity. Standards regarding electronic records and essential documents intended to increase clinical trial quality and efficiency have also been updated. So these were missing earlier in the previous version of ICH GCP. Now, I'll show you how the amendment looks like, but there is no change in the wordings on the previous version. The newer version includes the same old text from the previous R1, E6 R1, just that they have added few paragraphs or few new guidelines to the existing ones. In the event of any conflict between revision 1 and 2 addendum text, the R2 addendum text will take priority. It has been fully adopted by Canada from 1st of April, and that's why this is the best time for us to conduct this training. It was partially adopted in November 2017, but still it was under observation. And from this month onwards, we have gone full throttle. So this is how an addendum looks like. If you open an ICH GCP document, the guidelines, the older guidelines would look as a normal statement, whereas the addendum is put between two vertical lines. Now, not all sections have been changed in ICH GCP. Few have remained untouched, like the three of these, the gray part. Rest of them have seen changes, and a total of 26 new items have been introduced in the ICH GCP revision. This gives a summary view of what all changes have occurred and in which section. These total up to 26 changes. We have changes for the investigator site, maximum for the sponsor, and the document management part. Let's go about these in more detail. Section 1, in the glossary, they have added 3 more definitions of certified copy. What do you call a certified copy? It basically means signing and dating a document. Any signature must go with a date. Neither of them can be said to be a good documentation practice if they are just without their partners, like they are a married couple. So signature goes with a date. Monitoring plan, definition of it has been brought in now. Validation of computerized systems with the evolution of the ECRFs and other electronic systems in clinical trials. So just be aware of these terms. The section 2 of ICH GCP, which talks about the principle of the guidelines, there have been 2 new additions. First, it talks about clarification on the principles of ICH GCP that apply to all records irrespective of the type of media used. Earlier, many countries or many sponsors interpreted these guidelines in a different way, and inspection findings were countered with a justified answer. Now, ICH GCP has come up with a clarification that it can be any media. It need not be just paper or CD, or it can be electronic. It can be anything that is recorded for the trial purposes. Aspects of the trial that are essential to ensure human subject protection and reliability of trial results should be the focus of quality assurance systems. Now, this has been brought in because it was widely seen that sponsors do end up spending a lot of money, efforts. The protocol design is sometimes flawed, where they focus more on other aspects rather than focusing on achieving the primary goal of the trial and ensuring reliability of the data generation or the protection of human subjects. So this emphasizes heavily on that point. The impact is it clarifies what the guidelines means, and it encourages risk-based approach for quality management. So everyone's attitude should now change to risk-based approach. A monitor does not have to review every single data field in an ECRF now. He focuses only on certain aspects which are key to the trial success. Likewise, medical monitor or every role will have to focus on where the risk is for the trial, and uh, these 2 points should be taken care of. Now for the investigator part, 2 changes. The investigator is responsible for supervising delegated trial-related duties and functions to third parties, including qualifications of third parties, and should implement procedures to ensure integrity of data generated. Now, until now, the PI was held accountable for the duty delegation log and the duties that he used to assign to his team members. But this brings in the third parties as well, which can be a local laboratory at their site. Some analysis is done locally, and the PI never used to take ownership of any blunders done by the local lab. So now that has been brought under the purview of the PI. The PI is supposed to ensure that any local partners or third parties appointed by the PI needs to have their quality management processes.
That's just for research. That wouldn't be so. Also, then be input into results. That still apply, or is this just for research related?
It would be for research related testing, but I mean, the doctor would do a sample testing in the local lab for the protocol. Anything outside the protocol would not come under this purview. Did I get that clearly?
From a local.
Correct. So I'll give you an example. There have been instances where PIs would tell the sponsor, hey, I'm comfortable working with this local lab. I have 3 options in my area. This is the best lab I recommend for this trial. But does the PI take full responsibility of working with them and the data that has been generated from it? Is the data reliable for the trial? Does the lab have set processes of quality checks? Do they have CAP accreditation? That's a big thing. Like they should have accreditation with a globally recognized or at least the nationally recognized body. So
How do you define what we would want? That's what you mean. Has all this.
no, unfortunately not.
That's,
But
that's
yeah,
sponsor specific. Yeah, I know that's.
correct. Yeah, if the sponsor wants, they can always inspect or audit the facility, but they haven't clarified on that. But I'm really happy that they at least thought about this point, and earlier there was no accountability. Who would ensure that the data generated from the local X-ray lab is authentic? So this now holds the PI responsible for it. So if a malpractice has been detected, we can ask the PI to take corrective actions.
Of that. Actually, just above this. How related?
Right. Thanks, Prince. Now, the second change for the investigators is the source data should also be complete, which is an existing industry expectation, but is now added to Alcoa to create Alcoa C. Now, for those who attended my last year's session on good documentation practices, may recall that there is something called as Alcoa. It's an acronym that was formally adopted by the US FDA in 1999, and it was basically to list down the key areas of good documentation practices, what every site should look at. Like A stands for attributable, then legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and now C has been added, which says the source should be complete. I can give a classical example where a site has documented, has some written notes about a subject. Now, the notes ran into 3 pages, but just 2 pages were available when the site was monitored or audited. So where was the third page? It has happened quite often in many of the sites, at many of the sites. So this definitely we can hold the sites accountable based on this. Also, it is a good practice to paginate your documents. If it's a 3-page document, please mention at the bottom of the document as page 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3. Don't just write 1, 2, 3. So that definitely helps to ensure that we are compliant with this. Now, the impact of these changes is the investigator sites to be monitored for extended investigator responsibilities for overseeing third parties pharmacy imaging, as we discussed. Okay, now about the sponsor. This is the area where maximum changes have occurred. It may not apply to most of the audience members here today, but some of the investigators here act as sponsors themselves. So it's still worthwhile spending some time on this. The most important part that has been brought in here is the quality management. Sponsor must focus heavily on the quality of the data that has been generated. Now, they have been doing it all these years, but it really isn't with uh, a, a plan to ensure the safety of the patient or to ensure the integrity of the data. You will see it in the upcoming slides. Oversight of subcontracted tasks by CRO. Now, in 1996, when the earlier version of ICH GCP was brought in, CRO business wasn't something. It wasn't running as well as it is right now. So the guidelines didn't really think of the CRO model then, but now CROs play a heavy role in conducting global trials, local trials, and they in fact act as the sponsors. Use of computerized systems. Of course, we have all the electronic systems these days. They need to have validation, SOP, data integrity. I'll talk more about SOP here in the coming slides. Extent and nature of monitoring. Earlier, traditionally, monitoring used to be where a monitor would physically visit the site every month and check for the data that has been generated and do his regular task of monitoring. But now the approach has completely changed. It changed for the good. It has been centralized to a great extent where a trend can be seen across the sites, across patients. We can identify issues and risks in a specific country or an area or a province and rectify the situation by centralized monitoring. Also risk-based. Risk-based means if we see that 2 sites in Manitoba are struggling, whereas Ontario sites are doing great. So we have more risk at Manitoba sites. So we should focus more. So that's risk-based monitoring. Provision of monitoring results, monitoring plan, non-compliance. All these have further elaborations in the guideline. I'm not going much into detail, but sponsor to implement the quality management system, they should have a set process to manage quality for their trials. Focus on subject protection and reliability of trial results. As I mentioned earlier, this wasn't the focus area of any sponsor audits. They would be more concerned about other aspects. I'm generalizing here. There are some very good sponsors who do take care of the subject safety, but not all. So methods used for QA should be proportionate to inherent risks of the trial. You cannot introduce too many QA procedures for a trial, which is a very simple single site trial and it doesn't really need that much of an oversight. So we should stop wasting money, efforts towards it and stop introducing more challenges for the PI. It will discourage a PI to do a research if there are too many QA procedures for a simplified trial. So it should be proportionate. Avoid unnecessary complexities. Talks the same thing. Now, risk-based approach. Risk identification, system and trial level, as I explained. Evaluation, likelihood, extent. Risk control, how to prioritize, which sites to focus more on. Risk reduction, activities to be carried out. Risk communication, any risk that has been identified before, during, or after the trial needs to be communicated between the key stakeholders. It can be the PI, the sites, the ethics committee, or your funding agency in an academic environment. Risk review. This should be an ongoing process during the trial. Risk reporting. It should be reported to the due stakeholders. Limited resources should be used to where it is necessary. So don't put money everywhere. Just focus on few sites, target on those, put all your efforts over there and help the site come up with solutions and bring that up to the expected levels. Utilization of IT. Need validation. If the system has essential function. Now, using an MS Excel tool is a classical example of how a single site investigator would use that tool for his or her trial. Now, Excel sheet use is, I wouldn't encourage that use mainly because there are hardly any tools to validate it. But if you use programs like SAS or something where you can actually validate, you can still do some validation programming in Excel, but the investigator needs to focus more on that. These new guidelines forces everyone to look into that aspect as well. We cannot just create a table and then start filling in the patient data. It needs to be validated and someone third person needs to validate it. Need SOP, predefined quality tolerance limits, periodic reviews, deviation from quality tolerance limits will be included in the clinical study report. Now, every sponsor is supposed to have their SOPs on quality management. If there are any noted deviations from that management plan, that has to be documented in the clinical study report that is generated at the end of a trial. Points for data reliability and certified copy. Now, certified copy, as I mentioned, any photocopy needs to be signed and dated. So if a sponsor visits your site and requests for a document, you are allowed to give that document if it doesn't have patient identifiers. Let them take the original document, but also there must be a certified copy at the site replacing that original document. So it is our responsibility to ensure that the document is still there at the site. at least the certified copy of it. The SOP should cover system setup, installation, and use. For the eCRF users and electronic system users, system validation and functionality testing must be done. Data collection and handling, system maintenance, system security measures, change control, data backup, recovery, contingency planning, and decommissioning. All these are extracts from the new ICH GCP addendum. It sounds monotonous, but these are all direct copy paste from the guidelines.
Are all those
No, they haven't given that much of an elaboration, but they just state if you have a third party doing a review for yourself, that is acceptable. If you have an authorized institute who can do it for you and give a certificate, yes, this system is validated, that can be accepted. No, I'm not aware of it, but that's a good point. I'll have to look more into it. Now, the last part of the presentation is about the essential documents. It is very much relevant to the sites as well as the sponsor. Sponsor and investigator to retain a record of the location of the respective essential documents. Now, there have been sites where I have visited. The coordinator is unaware of which site is where because there are multiple coordinators working at the site, and at the end they struggle to locate their documents. So this is addressing that issue. Document storage system, including for archival, to provide for document identification, version history, search, and retrieval. Now, the sites must have a document which says where every source document is located. If you have a subject file, mention it. Where is the subject file located? In which cupboard? Who has access to these storage areas? And what's the policy of the site? How long do you store the records for once the trial is closed out? The site should have developed such SOPs. If not, they should do it now after this implementation. How long are they going to archive? Who will have access? Is the PI only person to access the archive documents? So all these things need to be thought of. Essential documents should be supplemented or maybe reduced. Now, earlier, people used to put in a lot of effort in ensuring that all the ICH GCP listed documents are there in the file. Now, for some trials, many documents don't apply. Like I'm doing a trial where it's not a Health Canada trial or nor a US FDA trial. I don't need to fill a US FDA form 1572 or any other form for that. So why am I expected to file those documents? So now that with this new amendment, those redundant requirements have been eliminated. There has been a lot of flexibility been given to the sponsor as well as the site. But it's always a good practice to justify why you are not having the document. So in your file, if you're having a section for 1572, please mention a note that this is not applicable for your trial. Now, when a copy replaces an original, they should fulfill the requirements for certified copies. Investigator must have control of and continuous access to the CRF data. Investigators should have control of all essential documents generated by them before, during, and after the trial. Document record locations in records management plan. As I mentioned, please include. How many of your teams have SOPs for records management? I mean, I believe there are a few study coordinators here. Okay. Have you been having SOPs for records management? Great. I encourage all of you to start developing SOPs because if not now, later on, when you face an audit or in inspection, you will have to do that, and that can come as an observation. Investigators to retain original documents. However, if an original document is removed from the investigator site, leave a certified copy. The last part, Division 5 of the Food and Drug Regulations. Now, change in the ICH GCP impacts this Division 5 to a great extent, and that's why the guidance document right now is in a draft stage. The government has put it up for public review and commenting. It's available online. Any investigator, researcher, anyone from the community can have a look at it and suggest changes. This document is basically aimed to it's a tool to promote consistency and quality in the compliance activities for drug trials in humans in Canada. Health Canada is implementing GUI 100, that's another name for the guidance document, later in 2018. Right now, draft is available for comments, not to be implemented. Hence, I'm not taking any training on this part, but it's under draft as of now. It's an identifier used by Health Canada. It's the identifier for the guideline. GUI probably stands for the guideline. Guide, yeah. So I'll be taking up a training on this later on once it is implemented. But I encourage you to bring up any other issues, any more topics related.
If anyone has comments that they want. And two, they're also collecting, and they're collecting feedback from all the sites. So if you do have any comments that approved, feel free to send. And we'll be updating all the templates that are available on the CHI website. So N2 has already gone through the process of making sure that all the SOPs and templates comply with ICH. We did submit a few comments. Turpan actually reviewed them and rebranded them because now we are all under U of M, not CHI and U of M. So they'll all be rebranded U of M. And those will be available. Hopefully we'll hear back from their SOP committee. I think they meet sometime this month. So we'll get those posted and then I'll send an email out to everyone once they're online.
Does N2 have our MD on it?
I'll have to check. There's quite a few things I don't think that monitoring plans.
See, that's something that's really, it doesn't monitoring plans, maybe not that, but not necessarily for safety monitoring, quality management. Very researchers, that's not their specialty, especially in investigative issue. They're really going to, some studies are going to be a simpler type, right? And other ones more complex. But I really, they have to, the investigative initiative ones, they really are going to need some assistance.
And I think also a document that I'm not sure is available is how to set up a DSMD, how often they should meet. I mean, a lot of the actual monitoring stuff comes down from the sponsors, but for the investigator-initiated study, I mean, they all need to set up a DSMD. They all need to have.
They don't all have to. I don't know. Studies. I mean,
for the most part, if they are clinical trials routine, they should be having a DSMD. And what that looks like is kind of